Hi guys, this is Cami Westall with your video lecture for Tuesday, September 25th. I'm sure all of you will be watching it promptly during class time, but that's okay. Anyway, we'll pick up with where we kind of left off in the American Revolution, which began in 1775. We discussed the other day how the vote for independence actually occurred on July 2nd, 1776. And I may go a little faster here just because you have the capability of pausing this since it's a video. So pause it as you need to jot down notes or replay anything. But things had been going up all the way along, beginning that year with Common Sense coming out in January of 1776. The British having evacuated Boston, Boston getting back to normal. People had been excited, they voted for independence, but there's kind of an ominous sign that things are about to start going downhill because the same day they vote for independence, the British come back. William Howe, commander of the British fleet, lands in Staten Island. Staten Island is in New York. So the British had gone up to Canada. They left Boston, went up to Canada. Now they've come back down to New York and will be there at Staten Island. So they've come back. So we voted for independence, independent country. The British don't recognize that. And here we are fighting with the British. Mentioned that Washington had started to kind of put an army together, a continental army. The first time they really will see action will be there in New York, all the same little area where the mouse is hovering. That's the area around Brooklyn, around Staten Island, and that's where Washington will initially face off in August against Howe. You can see here's where Howe had left in March, gone up to Canada. Now they've come back. If you follow this line, have come back to New York, or Howe has come with them, and they will face off at this Battle of Brooklyn Heights in August. So the first time that Washington really uses his continental army to see what he's got. Again, at the Battle of what's famously called, although slightly erroneously, Bunker Hill, that had not been Washington. That had been the Minutemen ready to go there. This is the actual Continental Army fighting at Brooklyn Heights in New York against the British Army, and it's a disaster for the Patriots, or the Americans. Many of them are captured, brought back to terrible conditions on board British ships. A lot of the rest of them flee, a humiliating loss for the Americans. And so things had been going so well, but now it's obvious that our army can't stand up very well to the powerful British army and their tactics. Things continue to go downhill for much of the rest of 1776. People are questioning the decision to vote for independence and whether we had done the wrong thing. People are questioning Washington's leadership. And by the end of the year, and this is where Washington's smart decisions will start to pay off, he's really in a bind. 1776, the second half of the year, things are getting worse and worse, continue to lose little battles. Washington knows that he may lose a lot of his troops soon, and that will lead to a famous battle at the Battle of Trenton on Christmas night. Early 1777, so come January, the Continental Army soldiers, a lot of their terms of enlistment would expire. They needed to go back home to their farms. It didn't look like there was any chance that people would win in this war because they had been losing every battle that they fought in pretty much. So Washington, the morale is low for soldiers. Everybody knows that they're probably going to lose because that's all they've experienced so far. Washington needs to have a major victory at the end of 1776 to ensure that troops will be willing to re-enlist in his army. So he makes his famous crossing of the Delaware River. It's kind of confusing that he's going to New Jersey. Trenton is in New Jersey. He crosses the Delaware River on Christmas night. It's a surprise attack. We have already talked about how the other day not a lot of professional troops expected surprise attacks. They still engaged in a lot of pitched warfare at this time. But Washington's men crossed the icy Delaware River on Christmas night. It's a holiday. The opposing troops aren't expecting it. It's the end of the year. Washington needs a victory to ensure that people will re-enlist in his army so they can live to fight again. It's a very successful victory for Washington's men there. They surprise the troops that are on guard there at Trenton. It is not the regular British Army, the Redcoats, that they surprise at Trenton. The people on duty were hired by, disregard all this, this is from a video for another little class. The people who were hired to fight there were the Hessians. Hessians were a German group of soldiers, Germanic-speaking mercenary soldiers that had come to fight alongside the British. One of the things that had riled the Americans in the Declaration of Independence was how foreign troops were being called in by the king to fight against these Americans. So now here we are with the Hessians being defeated. And this was what Washington needed. Even though they didn't defeat the main well-trained Redcoat army, this enabled enough people to taste that success and say, okay, maybe we can hold on to fight another day. And a lot of people did sign up for new terms of enlistment. He followed the victory at Trenton on Christmas night up a couple of days later, on January 2nd at Princeton. Princeton is also in New Jersey, where Princeton University is. Here they fought against Hessians again, and it was another battle where, excuse me, I got a cough. Hold that thought. Okay, I'm back, getting over respiratory bug that I got. This was a battle where initially the Patriots, or the Americans, were losing, but Washington, their general, kind of rode up on horseback, tried to rally the troops at the front lines. That's not what you want your main general doing. That's dangerous for your general to go out to the front lines. You want him way in the back where he's secure. But here General Washington, who lives up to a lot of this American mythology for just being this huge guy, way taller, as we talked about, than the average height. He never got sick or had to take sick leave. He'd go up to the front lines. There were several times where his jacket was shot, people said, and he wasn't shot himself. But here that was a very rallying thing for the soldiers to see their general right there beside them. And they fought well, and they won another victory at Princeton. So things have gone well for the Patriots, the Americans, in December and January. And you've got more people re-enlisted. Even though these two battles were fought during the winter, you really don't have tons of battles fought during that time, even during the American Civil War, because people tend to go into winter quarters. It's difficult to move all of your troops, all your supply lines and carriages when there's a ton of snow up north, not something that we had any of in Greenwood last year. But they tended to stay in winter quarters. And so kind of at the beginning, during the winter of that early 1777, those few months, the British come up with a new strategy, which is to cut off New England from the other colonies. And the way that they plan to do that is by gaining access to the Hudson River. So here you see this blue strip where the mouse is moving. That's the Hudson River there. What they hope to do is have one general down south, and he'll gradually move north and cut off this part of the Hudson River. Have another general in Canada moving south and blocking off the Hudson River. And if you do that, then basically you would separate the colonies, and that would be tough for the colonies to recover from, because you can't get troops back and forth or supplies back and forth. They would be divided in two. So that's their new strategy, is separate New England from the remainder of the colonies by seizing control of the Hudson River. So the two generals who were involved in this plan were William Howe, who was going to be starting off in lower New York, and John Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny, who was going to be in Canada pushing south. So he's going down the Hudson River. William Howe was supposed to go to the north. But William Howe, after they come out with this plan, and they get Burgoyne in place up in Canada, William Howe does something different late that summer or early that fall. Instead of going north like he's supposed to do, he goes south, and he takes control of Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is an important city. It's where Independence Hall was depicted here. It's where the Declaration of Independence had been signing. It's where the Continental Congress was meeting. But there's a problem. It's really hard to communicate with people at this time. He's getting all of his main orders from England. That's complicated enough when all of your orders are going to be that late getting there because they have to go across the ocean. You can't send a fax message to anybody. He can't send a text message to John Burgoyne to say, OMG, sorry, I forgot to tell you, I changed my mind and I'm going south. Burgoyne still thinks the old game plan is in place. Burgoyne's still marching down the Hudson River. He's expecting that Howe is going to be going up north. But no, Howe goes to Philadelphia and basically just sits around there partying for a while. He actually summons his mistress over from England to join him in Philadelphia. The Continental Congress is they're okay, but they're forced to disperse and leave Philadelphia. So Howe stays there. So now Burgoyne is going to be in a mess because he's not going to have any support. When the Americans find out that Howe has moved south, they go to tackle Burgoyne. And the person who will do that is Horatio Gates. So Horatio Gates, American general, really kind of resentful that he volunteered his services to fight in the American Army, but he thought he should be the top dog. He wanted George Washington's position as commander of the Continental Army. But Horatio Gates, he takes an army up to New York to meet and face off against John Burgoyne. Burgoyne still anticipates that Howe is going to meet him. Howe is not going to meet them. We know something that he doesn't. And Horatio Gates, his men will fight against John Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga in October of 1777, and they score a major victory. Burgoyne's men were largely weakened because a lot of their supply lines had been attacked, thanks to the heroics of an American named Benedict Arnold, who we'll be talking more about for different reasons in the future. But here, this is John Burgoyne handing his terms of surrender over to Horatio Gates. This is a really, really key battle for a lot of reasons. For one thing, it proved that the strategy of separating New England off had failed. Howe never showed up. Burgoyne was stopped because Burgoyne didn't have any help. But these aren't just Hessians or other mercenaries, soldiers for hires. These are the actual British troops. This is a well-trained regiment of the Redcoats, the British Army, that lose to Horatio Gates here. So Horatio Gates is boosted to celebrity status. It's the first time that the Americans have defeated an actual band of British Redcoat soldiers. So the Continental Army, not just the militiamen or Minutemen or anything like that, or not just fighting the army fighting against mercenary troops, but these are the proud British soldiers, the British Army, regular British Army, and they have been defeated by Horatio Gates. And that gives a lot of people hope that America maybe really can win this thing, including France. This was the victory that France needed to support us. And we had sent this famous little guy, popular with the ladies for reasons that I really don't see, Benjamin Franklin, the man who way back had first kind of proposed the Albany Plan of Union, Benjamin Franklin has been over in France. Continental Army sent him there. He's from this famous inventor, really one of very few actually respected Americans. People in Europe just viewed Americans as being poor and kind of backwoods folks, not educated like Europeans tended to be educated. But Benjamin Franklin is one of very, very few highly respected Americans in Europe. And Franklin is a genius. He invents bifocals in glasses, just says, what if I combine two sets of lenses so I can, as your eyes need to focus in on things that are close and far away, you can have it all in one set of eyeglasses. So he invents bifocals. He invents the Franklin stove, which is still used in places. It was a way of allowing you to heat your home without as much risk of fire. He's big on promoting postal service and the libraries. Opens the first library in Philadelphia. An inventor. I just said that, his famous lightning experiments with electricity. Famous publisher, published something called Poor Richard's Almanac. A lot of famous sayings that you're familiar with, like the early bird catches the worm, and a penny saved is a penny earned. Those come from Ben Franklin. His little maxims. If you ever go see Ben Franklin's grave in Philadelphia, there are a lot of pennies on it from people leaving those for him from his little maxim there. But he is this celebrated guy in France, and they love him in France. They think he's hilarious. He dresses in this simple clothing, but he was trying to get the French to support America in this war. The French hated the British, but the French needed evidence that America could win. The United States could actually defeat the French. And when the United States won at Saratoga, that's what the French needed. So it takes about 6 weeks for word to get over there. So it's already early 1778 by the time France can come up with an official agreement on paper, the Franco-American Alliance, an alliance where France is going to help us out first with things like ammunition, but then also with soldiers later in the war and financial support that we need to defeat England in the end. So Saratoga was the victory that Franklin needed to help win French support, and we needed that French support for the war. So things are turning around again. Even though things are really good in a lot of ways during that time, this is the same period, the very end of 1777, so after Saratoga, early 1778, when you have the famous Valley Forge camp. Washington was not at Saratoga, but Washington and his men, they went into winter quarters at Valley Forge, which is in Pennsylvania. And this was a very, very rough winter at Valley Forge. Not only were the conditions miserable in general, with tons of cold weather and freezing temperatures and snow, but remember, Howe was in Philadelphia, and I mentioned that the Continental Congress had to disperse. What that means is that it's hard for Congress to get money for supplies to these troops that are in winter quarters. So these troops are running very, very short on supplies. You'll see a lot of images of them with their feet bandaged because they ate their shoes, because that was all that some of them had to eat. So absolutely miserable conditions, tons of disease, not a good winter whatsoever for Washington and his men at Valley Forge. One of the things that starts to turn things around for them will be the arrival of a Prussian, not Russian, but Prussian general with one of my favorite names in history, Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, that February. So Prussia will give us some support as well. And Prussia is kind of like modern day Germany. Germany isn't created until 1871. And when Germany is formed, it kind of combines several smaller countries, and Prussia is one of those. But Prussia was still a powerful military force in Europe. And von Steuben comes, and he is going to bring this army into shipshape condition. And he instills a lot of traditional European military tactics that these soldiers needed to learn how to use. One of the things he did was teach his soldiers how to use the bayonet. So the bayonet on your rifle, on your musket, is, you can see him kind of holding one, or these soldiers here, it's sort of the metal part that, like the knife that sticks out from your gun. He knows that these guys are short on ammunition. So without ammunition, if you were facing off against soldiers, you needed to have something other than your bullets to be able to defend yourself with, or go on the offensive with. So he trains them how to use the bayonet, so you can basically stab it into your enemy and make some progress there in gruesome, gory fashion. But that was a necessary thing that these soldiers needed to learn. He instilled a lot of discipline in them. He would cuss the heck out of them, but he didn't speak English. And so it's not really the same if you're being cussed out in a language that you don't recognize. So he found another soldier that spoke German, and basically he would cuss that guy out in German, and then that guy would translate to English and cuss the rest of the soldiers out. But he wanted there to be strict military discipline, and so he reorganized the camps. He had the officers sleeping on separate sides of the camp from the enlisted men, the privates. He wanted that respect for the officers, so he wanted that discipline there. He also changed, this is well before the germ theory of disease comes out. It's about 100 years before that. But he's smart enough to know that people tend to get sick when your kitchen area, your canteen, is close to your bathroom area, the latrine. And so he puts the bathroom latrine area on the separate side from the food area to try to prevent disease from spreading, spare more lives, allow better health then. So von Steuben is largely credited with really helping shape up the Continental Army. There's a big statue of him right outside the White House in D.C. for his contributions to the American Army and ultimately our independence for when he came. 1778, England gets a new commander. You get Henry Clinton replaces Howe. Howe goes back to England. Henry Clinton comes in. And they kind of stay and have some more fights up north. That year, the British don't make any remarkable progress, so they decide that they're going to move down south and try a new approach. So, end of 1778, beginning of 1779, the British move south, and they're going to concentrate their efforts on fighting in the south. And they do that for a couple of reasons. Their new strategy is going to be to kind of start in the south, down in Georgia, and take sort of one colony at a time. Part of the reason they need to do that is because the French are now fighting against them in the Caribbean, the islands down in the Caribbean. So they needed the support, or they needed to support their crews fighting in the Caribbean against the French and be closer to that action as well. But another big reason is because the South had more, I could have just erased Hessians, I guess. The South had more loyalists. So you've got, if you're an American at this time, you're either a loyalist or a patriot. Or you're undecided. The South, the American South, had a lot more loyalists than the North did. In the North, more people were involved in shipping. They were therefore more directly affected by a lot of the British laws that we've talked about in class before. But more people in the South were indifferent towards that. So in the South, you had a lot of loyalists, and that meant that you would have more people fighting alongside you in the South. And so there are going to be some battles fought in South Carolina where there are no British people, or there are just one or two British people. It'll basically be like a civil war in the South, with Americans fighting against one another in many instances. The Army will be involved as well, but you do have a lot of fights that occur between patriots and loyalists without an official army actually being involved on either side. So the Redcoats move south. The Army's got to send a group of soldiers down south to fight against them. And they send Benjamin Lincoln there with several thousand men. So Benjamin Lincoln is sent down to Charleston to try to defend the South from this new British approach. Well, 1779 they take Georgia. 1780 they head for Charleston. Charleston, the most important city in the South. And they lay siege to it. Benjamin Lincoln is forced to surrender along with all of the Army troops that had come with him. Charleston, the most important city in the South, has now fallen into the hands of the British. This pretty much spells disaster for the American cause, because now Georgia and its strategic cities like Savannah and Charleston have fallen to the British. It looks like the British are easily going to succeed in their strategy. And they're so confident that Henry Clinton, he actually heads back up north, and he leaves this guy in charge, Charles Cornwallis. And Cornwallis stays there in the Charleston area with 8,000 men. Cornwallis is going to be tasked with kind of trying to take over the rest of South Carolina, then move into North Carolina. If you're thinking about The Patriot with Mel Gibson here, I don't like that movie. It's very inaccurate in a lot of ways, but Cornwallis is kind of the head British general kind of guy in that movie, which I don't like, so don't get me mad and talk about what a wonderful movie it is, because it's not. Anyway, said my piece on that. Cornwallis stays. One of the people who he really is going to rely on, oops, got my slides backwards, is Banastre Tarleton. Cornwallis once remarked that we can do no good without you. He very much relied on Banastre Tarleton here with his crazy hat on. There's spandex-looking pants. Tarleton, again, in The Patriot, he's the basis for the really bad guy in that movie. And Tarleton is a nasty guy. But he heads up the cavalry. The cavalry are the troops on horseback, so people don't, get those things misspelled all the time. Cavalry, the cavalry. Oh wait, I just got it backwards myself. Good grief. Cavalry. Yeah, I got it backwards myself. Goodness. Calvary is the hill. That's the hill where Jesus died. The cavalry. Goodness. I guess I can't count off against y'all if you miss it, because I just get it confused myself. Very easy to get those two confused. Cavalry. Those are the on horseback. So Jesus died. There are a lot of churches, Calvary Hill or whatever, Calvary Chapel, for being the hill on which Jesus was crucified back around 29 AD. But he's a cavalry guy. Goodness. So, and he's going to be pretty nasty in his tactics. When Lincoln surrendered, South Carolina for a long time, there are a few, well, not that long, for a few weeks, there's not going to be an army in place. But you've still got patriots. Again, there's not an official Continental Army, but this is where some of South Carolina's heroic folk figures come into play. Thomas Sumter, known as being the Gamecock for his tenacious fighting abilities. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. Got Francis Marion University down south, Sumter, South Carolina, down farther south in the state. These are people who aren't in the official Continental Army, but they're still kind of helping in these guerrilla warfare style tactics. And they will drive the British Army crazy, because they know these back trails along the, especially along the Blackwater area in the low country. And so the British soldiers may be there, and all of a sudden a couple of them get picked off by a gun, and it's Francis Marion and a couple of his friends sort of killing these guys, and they disappear because they know all these backwoods trails. So these guys are kind of helping with the resistance against the British occupying forces. But Tarleton is nasty. At one point he goes to Sumter's house. Sumter's looking for Sumter. Sumter's wife was there. She had some sort of physical disability where she couldn't walk well. And she said, "My husband's not here." And basically they dragged her to the yard where she couldn't get up on her own, and they forced her to watch as they burned her house down. So Tarleton is a nasty guy, and he's largely tasked with trying to stop these little groups and pockets of people helping the Patriot cause. And one of the incidents where he's very ruthless again occurs at the Waxhaws. The Waxhaws, this is a little area kind of along the North Carolina, South Carolina border. And Tarleton's cavalry is riding all around, and they happen to see a group of men coming down from North Carolina. These were men who, on their own accord, wanted to join the cause fighting for the Patriots. There was no official Continental Army in town then. They see Tarleton's men. They put their arms up to surrender. Under the terms of war at that time, if someone tried to surrender, then you were supposed to take them as prisoner of warfare, and there were certain rules and protocol for how you treated them, just as there are today. Well, Tarleton ordered his men to charge into this group. And so I think it was about 20-something people who were pretty much slaughtered there, and it became known as Tarleton's Quarter. These men who were attempting to surrender were slaughtered. It gets quarter for being like quartered, as in cut up into pieces. Some of the survivors were taken to a local area to try to receive medical treatment. There was a young boy who witnessed those people being brought back in, and he swore he would always hate the British after witnessing that atrocity, and his name was Andrew Jackson, who we'll be talking about later in the course as the man on the $20 bill. But this is going to catch up to Banastre Tarleton, but it's evidence of just how cruel and how ruthless and how bloody this guy could be. That June, the South needs to stop Cornwallis and his men from marching forth again. So they bring down the hero of Saratoga, Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates arrives in North Carolina. Cornwallis is still gaining some territory in South Carolina. Gates is cocky at this time, but celebrated as a hero, and he did win this pretty... He needed help from others, but he won this huge battle at Saratoga back in 1777. So, Gates finds out that Cornwallis is on the march that August, and the two sides will face off at the Battle of Camden. And this is considered the worst loss for the Continental Army in the American Revolution. It's bad. It's depressing. Gates's men, well, basically Gates forced his men to rush to this meeting point, and he didn't take the main roads. And the problem with taking back roads at this time is you had no supplies. So his troops were very weary from kind of trying to make their own path through the woods. They didn't have a lot of supplies. They were hungry. They were tired. They were already exhausted when they get to Camden. Instead of allowing them to rest, Gates orders them to fight against Cornwallis the very next morning. He was able to get some meat for some of them, but it turned out that the meat was rotten, And so these guys who were already weak and malnourished to begin with now start throwing up all over the place. But Gates still sends them into battle. It is a disaster from the outset. About a third of the Americans are killed, a third captured, a third flee or disappear or aren't heard from again. Even Gates himself, the commander should have stuck around. Gates he rode 70 miles on horseback that day. He rode about 300 miles in 3 days. I mean, he fled. He got out of there. And so now this is an awful loss because Cornwallis continues to push forth. Now the Americans are humiliated because Horatio Gates just totally got the heck out of there, abandoned his troops and his army. 2 armies have now been lost. 2 units of armies that have been brought down, first under Lincoln and then under Horatio Gates, have been lost. So things are not looking good whatsoever for the American cause at this point. And so it'll take a couple of turnaround events, which I was going to get into, but now I think that my throat from being sick has had about all it can have for the night, so I'm going to stop it there. We'll pick back up with this on Thursday.